So a month or so ago, I think, Chris and I had breakfast with a neighbor here, fellow believer, and just I got to know him, but he made a statement, and I leaned over to Chris and said, "That's a good sermon series." And here I am. Because we're talking about Matthew chapter 24 and 25. And so 24 this is the title of this morning's message, The Signs of the Times. Return of Jesus and the sign of the times. All right? But he said that basically 24 are the signs of the times. 25 is really what Jesus therefore expects us to do while we're waiting. You got to come back next week because you're only going to get half of that because I'm not doing that part today. All right? I just want to talk a little bit about the signs of the times. Because, one, there's a problem in that we get obsessed over this stuff. We can get obsessed. Man, and I love this stuff. That's the thing, so I got to be careful. I grew up as a teenager. I'm reading, some of you may remember this book, The Late Great Planet Earth. That was a little bit different than Ancient Astronauts, which I also read, by the way. That was there, This was Hal Lindsey's book about the signs of the times and the end times. Late Great Planet Earth. And then he wrote a book called There's a New World Coming. I actually used that for a Bible study as a teenager because it just went chapter by chapter through the entire book of Revelation. And then a number of years later, and how many of you have read the Left Behind series? I think we have the whole series in our resource center, right? The Left Behind series, which is what's Jerry Jenkins' attempt to describe or tell a story of what the end times might look like. And it was just done as a novel and as a story, but kind of trying to maybe filling in some of those gaps. Jesus talks about this. It's in Matthew chapter 24. So I'm just going to take some time to go through some verses in that chapter and let's just look at some of the things he said. It's rated G. I'm not going into all of these here. I told them it was rated R actually when you left, but it was just because what I'm not going to do is what we probably all want me to do, and that is, come on, explain how this is going to happen, because that's what we want to know, right? There's a problem with that I'll get to. But let's just begin. So it says in Matthew chapter 24, beginning with verse 1. As Jesus was leaving the temple grounds, his disciples pointed out to him various temple buildings. But he responded, "Do you see these buildings? I tell you the truth, they will be completely demolished, and not one stone will be left on top of another." Wow, Jesus, we were just talking about the buildings, and, what kind of response is that, right? So here's the thing. Jesus is just being very prophetic at that moment because that came true. Here's Jesus, and it's, we look at Jesus living on earth here, AD, 30 to 33, around there. And he's crucified at that end and then ascended. It's 70 AD, 40 years later. About 40 years later, Rome came in because there was a lot of uprisings going on, and they completely demolished. They came in, and there's a Jewish historian called Josephus, and I don't know in terms of all of how some of this came out. The details almost don't matter. It's the fact that what Jesus said actually came true. Some said they were also worried, the Jewish people, they put all their gold in the temple, and then that was set on fire, the gold melted, and they had to break all the rocks just to get the gold, the Romans did. And that just said what? Nothing was left on top of one another. But however that happened, and having gone there, you see that it's just, mostly level. There's the temple. It came true. So that's kind of like you said, what about these buildings? Hey, let me tell you something. They're not going to last. Oh, geez, what is that about? So they have questions. The disciples have questions. So the next verse tells us later Later that day, Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives, and his disciples came to him privately and said, tell us when this is going to happen. I mean, they can't get that out of their minds, right? Tell us when this is going to happen. What sign will signal your return and the end of the world? And I got to say that disciples probably thought the destruction of the temple and your return are really linked in time, and it's all going to happen together. But what is the sign and the signal of your return and the end of the world? There's the question. So what did Jesus say about this? So Jesus told them, do not let anyone mislead you. For many will come in my name, claiming, I am the Messiah, and they will deceive many. You will hear of wars and threats, rumors of wars, but don't panic. These things must take place, but the end won't follow immediately. See? Nation will go to war against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in many parts of the world. But this is only the first of birth pains, with more to come. Woohoo! This is all good news, right? Yeah. So the disciples want to know when, because that's our question. That's the question so many people have today. Well, when, right? And Jesus is just saying, listen, there's going to be a lot of people, false messiahs, people claiming to have authority, people claiming to know, people claiming to be the Savior. I wonder sometimes, we biblicize that, spiritualize that. Someone's going to come and claim to be the Messiah, the Savior, the one who saves us. I wonder if in our world, though, and especially in a secular world, people don't hear that from, for instance, politicians. Elect me and I will be your Savior. False messiahs, right? And then there's going to be wars. There's going to be rumors of wars. There's, And what Jesus says here is, don't panic. I'm going to come back to that in a minute, because I think it's one of the points I want us to leave with, right? In Luke's version of this story, right? In Luke's version, he adds the word pestilence. There will be wars and rumors of wars and famines and pestilence and earthquakes. And I'm going, all right. I was in, all of my illustrations today are like happened in the last month. I'm in my office and everything starts shaking. Because there's an earthquake going on. When does that happen around here? It's like, earthquakes. We hear about them on the news. We know that they're happening. We know certainly that there are wars, and right now even rumors of wars. Iran now and Israel, and they're all going on, right? Pestilence, the definition of that is disease that kills. So I don't know. Oh, wait a minute. I think we've just gone through that too. And he says, this is only the beginning, folks. I said to my wife during, Jesus is telling all this, and he goes, and you think it's bad now, you ain't seen nothing yet. Birth pains. You're going to see these things, and I will not, by any way, shape, or form, begin to understand birth pains. Just saying that, okay? But what we do know is, when it comes time, when the time to be delivered happens, labor pains begin. And at first, typically, there's a pain, and it's a little bearable, but we know it's there, and they're far apart. But what happens as the birth gets sooner? They come quicker, and they become more intense. Birth pains to these things. We had one of our saints who's gone to be with the Lord. many of you will know who I'm talking about, was a big Star Trek fan in her 90s. My wife and I took her to see a Star Trek movie at one point. That was great. And the problem was, when we talked, see, Star Trek sets up a utopia on Earth. That by the time Star Trek takes place, all of these things that Jesus is talking about don't exist. There's not even currency. There's, it's this, somehow there is a much better life, and we're heading for that. And it's the temptation is to go, oh, come on, folks, can't we just get along? Can't we just get this right? Can't we create some type of utopia on Earth? And I'd say to her, yeah, I am pretty confident I can say biblically that ain't going to happen. Okay? It's just not going to happen. We're not going to do this by ourselves. Right? The birth pains are telling us as these things happen, it's going to get worse. And then Jesus comes. Right? Here's how it gets a little bit worse. He continues. Then you're going to be arrested, persecuted, and killed. Oh man, this just gets better and better. You will be hated all over the world because you are my followers. And many will turn away from me and betray and hate each other, and many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Sin will be rampant everywhere, and the love of many will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this is the verse Chris was talking about. And the good news about the kingdom will be preached throughout the whole world so that all nations will hear it. Then the end will come. So there was a thought that came to me, actually, Chris, I can say, if we just don't do what you said, Jesus won't come back and we're good. Yes, people are good, right? It doesn't work that way either, does it? Wow. So look at what it's saying here. This is what Jesus is saying. You're going to be arrested and persecuted and killed. Well, I got to tell you, there are people this morning, this Sabbath, who that's a consequence of them worshiping God this morning. That's a very real threat. There are people right now, Christians right now, who know that they would come here, if they were to come and if they are caught worshiping God, if they're caught being a part of a church worshiping God, they will be arrested, they'll be put in prison, they could be killed. It's happening today. It's just not a part of our experience. Maybe yet. Because I got to tell you, there's things happening. And it's from countries that we consider democracies. Like right now, there are preachers in Canada that can get arrested for preaching certain things from a biblical point of view. I'm going to Scotland. I'm going to Scotland in July. Scotland just passed what is considered one of the most freedom of speech restriction laws that's probably ever been. Where if, as a Christian, you say, and I don't mean being offensive, but you say something biblical that offends, if that person determines you've offended them, you can get arrested. It's not, the onus used to at least be you got to prove you were offended or something. Nope. Somebody just has to say, they offended me. Around certain topics. And I'm like, I said, Ken and Tracy are coming with us. We're going to be doing this together. And I better be careful what we say over in Scotland, That's already happening in places that are not dictatorships or communist or anything else. The other thing, Jesus talks about Many will turn away, betray, hate each other. There's something in the apocalyptic literature and in Revelation that talks about an apostate church. Man. And I wonder sometimes if how we change what we believe or what the Bible teaches, at what point is it no longer a Christian? Can you call yourself a Christian? You know what I mean? So, some of you, I don't know if anybody, I know June Hall, I'm going to speak, but June, if you're listening, I'm going to talk about you. But we did a workshop, a regional workshop, and June was a part of, went to it, and I was a part of one of the teachers. It was about talking about a process called common ground. How do you have discussions in terms of disagreement, but focus on, first let's focus on what we can agree on before we start arguing and debating and doing all of that. It's a good process, actually, for conflict. But the way that we were going to take this group now, whoever went to this workshop, through a process, but we had to figure out what's the question we're going to use. What is it that we can pretty much be 50-50 divided on, where we can kind of say, all right, here's this process, this is how this process works. And somebody said, well, what about this? Which I would have never thought to ask. Do you believe that, this is churches, okay? Do you believe that Jesus is the only way? You're asking that question? And we couldn't use it because too many people believed he was not. I remember June coming out of there going, what just happened? Okay? And yet, that belief within churches is prevalent. Maybe you have that. I got to tell you, that's an apostate belief that is unbiblical. Apostate church, where there's many ways, and this is peace, and whatever, and you can belief is a buffet table. I have literally heard that. I choose, and this is around the atonement of Jesus. I don't know how you can pull the atonement out of the gospel and still call that Christian. It is the central theme, all over the place, right? But I can pick and choose, and this is a pastor saying, and I choose not to choose the atonement. I don't know what to do with that. But what I do know is it begins, they still call themselves a church, they still call themselves a Christian church, and you wonder how this is going to happen. It's going to happen very easily because it's already happening in some ways. Love will grow cold. Anybody notice that? Love seems to be an anomaly. And I'm not just talking romantic love. I'm just talking about caring about one another. Man, it's like, what is going on here? So all in the last month, a couple weeks ago, I went and got gas, Shell station down here, coming back about 9 o'clock at night. If you don't know Elmwood, they moved it from 2 lanes and 2 lanes to 1 lane and 1 with a center lane, pretty much all down Elmwood down here, so that left-hand turns can happen more easily. And so I am in this left-hand turn lane to just come up Patuxent right down here, right? Car is in front of me making the same turn. And all of a sudden I hear the squealing of wheels, and coming down Patuxent onto Elmwood is a car moving so fast that I don't know how he didn't hit the car in front of me. And right behind him is a truck, a pickup truck, following him, doing the same thing. And now I'm just going, well, man, people are just crazy, right? You know drivers are crazy. All the other drivers are crazy anyway, so. Except that then the light turned green. Turned green, and this car went, and I went, and I'm looking at my mirror, and what I think happened is the first car went and then did a U-ey, and the other truck had to stop, and somebody jumped out of that truck, fell, and was like chasing that. This was all in anger. And I went, and that's coming out of my neighborhood. Man, love. I just asked Craig, and I already knew the answer, but I needed to get an authoritative opinion here. Okay, if you don't know, Craig's the funeral director. I said, families coming together for funerals now, having arguments, feeling like they're entitled to money, or arguing about money and all of this thing. Has that grown? He's like, oh man, you have no idea how much that has grown in families. Love will grow cold. Apart from God, love is growing. I mean, everything is just so self-centered in me and selfish. Love has grown cold. Jesus is saying, listen, this is the hard part. This is something you're going to have to endure. It will not be easy being a Christian, okay? It is only going to get harder. And I'm going to say, Jesus says, and some of you are going to walk away because of it. Right? Some of you are going to, no, it won't be me. Well, I know a guy named Peter who to Jesus' face said, I will never, ever betray you until it got hard. Until there were consequences. And Peter denies him 3 times. I'm not willing. I'm not saying, I'm just saying be careful, because I'm not willing to go, that's not me. I pray it's not me. Depends, on how hard it gets. But the church, here's the good news. Do you know what the church, though, the real church? The church is going to be faithful to God's primary purpose. Because everybody in this world, every nation in some fashion, is going to hear the gospel. You know why? Because the church has been faithful throughout all of this. I do know I want to be a part of that church. Right? Now I'm going to skip a bunch of verses here. You can read it on your own. It's a long chapter, so it's verse 24. Chapter 24. But basically, in these next verses, it kind of repeats a little bit of it. He says, Jesus tells us, it's going to be so bad that if God actually didn't cut it short, nobody would survive. That's how bad it's going to get. Don't pay any attention to anybody who says the Messiahs are come. They're false messiahs. Because when Jesus comes, you're going to know it. Everybody's going to know it. There will be astronomical disruptions. The sun will go dark. Oh, wait a minute, I just saw that in the last month. The moon will go dark. The stars will go dark. You're going to know it. And then at last it says, so this verse is up there, the sign that the Son of Man is coming will appear in the heavens, and there will be deep mourning among the peoples on earth. And they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a mighty blast of a trumpet, and they will gather his chosen ones from all over the world, from the farthest ends of the earth and heaven. When I read the book of Revelation, and you should read it, because there's a blessing that goes along with reading that book, right? It says, if you read this book, there's a blessing. You should read the last book of the Bible. But it always amazed me that here's Jesus coming, and there's still people. I mean, he's like you can't deny him anymore, right? You're seeing him coming, and they're hiding, and they're even at that point not willing. How was that even possible? And it was on YouTube, and I heard somebody going, I don't care if Jesus is real. If he comes today, I will still not accept him. I went, and that's you in this, right? So the question comes is, are these things coming together? Well, of course they are. Every day we get a bit closer to the day that Jesus is coming back, right? Everything, I look out and I go, everything that is holy to God seems to be under attack worldwide. And here's the other difference for me, it's worldwide. So what is the timing? I don't know. And that's the important part. What is God's perfect timing in this? You know, the Bible tells us that Jesus came at the right time, but it doesn't say why it was the right time. And one of the things I look at is, this is just speculation, but one of the things that people talk about is, well, the right time may also be where we are as a world technologically. For instance, part of the reason they say the timing for Jesus was important is because Rome had now built roads. This allowed the gospel to be spread. They had more ability to spread the gospel, and if it was before that, it wouldn't have been able to go where it went. God uses the natural and creates the supernatural, by the way, all at the same time, right? Why was Jesus born in Bethlehem? Because of Caesar. That's God using the natural to go, and his foreknowledge and all of that going into that. So I used to think, because when I was reading Late Great Planet Earth, I was a teenager. We're going back to the 70s. How in the world? So I supernaturalize Jesus coming back. Every eye will see him like it's going to be this supernatural event, which is still very possible. But technology-wise, it's possible in a different way, isn't it? Because we can stream. You can see all over the world right now just by turning on your TV. I'm not saying it's one or the other. I'm saying we're in this place where all of that seems to me much easier to come true, because God uses both. And then he ends this. Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. When its branches bud and its leaves begin to sprout, you know the summer is near. Just thought, just go look outside. You get this beautiful tree over here blooming, some plants blooming. You see trees around the neighborhood. My wife's going, look how beautiful these things are, because she's so much more visual than me. And I'm going, yes, they are, And we know what that means. It's spring. Summer's coming. It's like, that's what Jesus is saying. In the same way, though, when you see these things that I've been talking about, you can know my return is very near, right at the door. I tell you the truth, this generation will not pass from the scene until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will disappear, but my words will never disappear. A lot of question about what it meant about this generation thing that I won't get into. All I'm simply saying, and what Jesus really is simply saying is, guess what? You're going to see these things. At some point, they're going to continue. It's not going to get better. It's the church that needs revival. But there's going to be a point where it's not the world that's going to be changed. I've put it this way recently. The church, at the same time the world is doing this direction, I believe the church is going to get stronger and stronger and more clear and clear about what our purpose is. They're going to happen at the same time, right? And what Jesus is simply saying here is, so pay attention. Pay attention. And by the way, when we keep telling people or encouraging people as a church and as fellow brothers and sisters, go to the scriptures, there's a reason. There's a reason why we hand out a Bible and say, here, this will take you through the Bible in a year. Because look at what Jesus said. Heaven and earth will disappear. My words will never disappear. His word is eternal. It matters. But then he says, however, pay attention, but however, no one knows the day or the hour when these things will happen. Can we just read this verse out loud? However, no one knows the day or hour when these things will happen. Not even the angels in heaven or the Son himself, only the Father knows. If anybody tells you, this is when it's going to happen, what are you going to say? Solar eclipse. Oh man, as that date was getting closer, I began looking at stuff going, oh well, we had another one earlier on and where they crossed, the name of the town was this, and it crossed through these towns. One of them was called Rapture, and one of it, oh, come on, Stop it. People, stop it. You're not going to figure this out. You're just not. Because this is what he says. when the Son of Man returns, it will be like it was in Noah's day. In those days before the flood, the people were enjoying banquets and parties and weddings right up to the day Noah entered the boat. People didn't realize what was going to happen until the flood came and swept them away. That is the way it will be when the Son of Man comes. And that's the world part of it. Certainly, the sinful world, they're not going to have a clue. He's telling us, pay attention. But don't spend a whole lot of time trying to figure out what day. Or is this, do you know how many times the world, or the Christians even, have predicted this is it? World War I, World War II, all, you were wrong. And when I was a teenager, you know what? Somebody figured out that Henry Kissinger was the Antichrist because they took the numbers and the letters associated and somehow got it to add up to 666. Well, he's dead and he's not the Antichrist, no matter what you might think about him. So, but he's not that person, right? It's like, and somebody put it this way, you spend so much, you become so heavenly minded, you become no earthly good. Right? I would challenge you as a church, as people who are churched, to pay attention and don't live like Jesus is describing and be unaware. I'm just going on with life. It's good. I got my parties and my weddings and got my job and all of that. But these things, the things of Jesus aren't central in your life. Pay attention. And then he ends with this. 2 men will be working together in the field. One will be taken, another left. 2 women will be grinding flour at the mill. One will be taken, one will be left. We typically call that the rapture. So you too must keep watch. There's the command. Keep watch. For you don't know the day that your Lord is coming. So be ready. Understand this. If a homeowner knew exactly when the burglar was coming, he would keep watch and not permit his house to be broken into. Duh. You must also be ready at all time, for the Son of Man will come when least expected. We all have to be good Boy Scouts. Be prepared. Jesus is going to tell us how to be prepared now in the next chapter. My takeaway for this is this. 1, don't panic. You will hear of wars and threats of wars, but don't panic. Do not fear. These are things that must take place, but the end won't follow immediately. Panic means do not be troubled. This is the way some of the translations translate that word. Panic. Do not be troubled. Do not be frightened. Do not be alarmed. Do not be disturbed. Do not fear. To be honest, if we just watch the news enough, it creates those things. And then we're distracted. Because Jesus is saying, I've literally had to curb how much news I'm watching. I go to sources now that try to be very unbiased, just tell what's going on without all the commentary. I think I shared this a couple weeks ago. Turned on the world news, haven't watched that for a while, and it's like story after story after story after story that is just terrible. And my wife says, oh yeah, they always save the good one for the last, a good story. And after all these world things going on, they had a really nice story at the end about a cat. And I'm sorry, that just doesn't cut it. That's all I'm saying, okay? Just be careful. Trust in Jesus in this. Don't get too, if you have to take a sabbatical from news, do that. I am aware of what's going on in the world. I don't have to get that absorbed, okay? Second, don't listen to anybody who says they know when, and don't get obsessed with trying to figuring it out. There's a reason Jesus didn't tell us. So we don't become so heavily minded we're no earthly good because we have a purpose here. Don't take the time on that away from the purpose that Jesus has called us to. So we're going to go into the next chapter for the next week or so, because that's just so what? Well, this is what Jesus says. Because you don't know when, be prepared, be aware, and this is what I want you to be doing. That's more important than knowing the time, right? So he ends with Jesus making his transition. Remember, there's no chapters and verses in the manuscript here, right? Jesus just continues on with talking to his disciples in the next chapter. And this is what he says. A faithful, sensible servant is one to whom the master can give responsibility, he's given us responsibility, right, of managing his other household servants and feeding them. If the master returns and finds that the servant has done a good job, there'll be a reward. I tell you the truth, the master will put that servant in charge of all he owns. But what if the servant is evil and thinks, my master won't be back for a while? Jesus' return, he's not coming for a while, right? And he begins beating the other servants, partying and getting drunk. The master will return unannounced, unexpected, and he will cut that servant to pieces. Ew. Here's the rated R part, right? And assign him a place with the hypocrites. And in that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So ends chapter 24. Transitioning to the next. So I want to just come back. In the meantime, that's what Jesus talks about. That's the reality. Whether it's now or not, I don't know. You don't know. But what I do know is Jesus says, it'll happen. Be prepared. Pay attention. Stand firm. That's our challenge. So Lord, we come today and go, wow, there's a lot of stuff there that is not pretty. And it will be a challenge. So Lord, increase our faith. Help us understand, but mostly, God, in the midst of this, give us the peace of knowing it is all a part, you know what you're doing. It's all a part of your plan. You got this. And I know what lies ahead. So please, Lord, give us, each of us, peace in that, and help us to do what you've called us to do, to be your church in the midst of a world that desperately needs to hear how much you love them. Amen.